All right. Hello, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. We are going to start. And before we begin, we'll just we have a few new people. We're not going to introduce everybody each time, as much as I love that. Just for a few new people who are here, just give us a 10-second hello and introduction to who you are. And I'll look across the screen here and see who we have. We have some people here also in the audience, which is wonderful. So let's see. Let's start with Jimmy. Jimmy, hello. How are you? Nice seeing you.
Hello, how are you? My name's Jimmy Frank. I'm a longtime visitor. Been a while though. I'm a Navy veteran, and I currently support the Coast Guard in Charleston, South Carolina.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining in. Patricia.
Hi, this is a thrill for me. First time. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and very interested in learning much more about the heritage of our scriptures.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Susan Wood.
I am Susan Wood, a friend of Rabbi Joe's and Yael's. Nice to see you, Yael. And I'm grateful for the invitation.
Wonderful. And Tricia Kramer.
Well, I'm not brand new because I came last time, but
That's right, you did. I'm sorry.
I'm happy to be here. I'm just happy to be invited. I love learning from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Brother Jay.
Jay Olson from in Manti, Utah. Also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, but I met Rabbi Joe about last March, and we've exchanged numerous emails and texts and phone conversations. So I'm just happy to join you and learn what I can. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Glad you could make it. You're a professor at Snow College in Ephraim, Utah.
That's correct.
And let's see, we've got iPad. I think there's that Nancy. Yes, we've had Nancy. Yes, nice seeing you, everybody. iPad is Nancy, a lovely Nancy.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, I was here a couple weeks ago and missed last week, but yeah, nice to be here. I guess I could say I was raised Lutheran majority of my life in the last few years, just being more interested in all religions and more importantly in spirituality and what we all have in common. And I just want to continue to grow that.
How's your father? Is he doing okay? Any better?
He's stable. He's stable.
Good. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Looks like we are with Bishop Troy.
Hi, I'm Troy Lemke. I'm also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's been my privilege and honor to know Joe and Sarah and Yael for close to 15 years now and attend many of Shabbat in person. I live in Colorado, but I'm grateful to join all of you today. And these things always expand my understanding and my appreciation for the spiritual. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you. He's a wonderful bishop, or now he's relieved of his calling, but we still call him bishop. And Eric, have you been here? You were here. Yeah, Eric. Okay. The wonderful Adit. Adit, welcome.
Everyone, my name is Adit. I live in New York City, and I've had the deep pleasure of knowing Rabbi Joe, Sarah, and Yael for the last year. Yeah, again, so grateful that you invited me to share this space with you guys.
Thank you. We always have wonderful conversations. And Don.
Well, hello. I am Don Schenecker. I currently live in South Carolina. I got to know Joe about 5, 6 years ago when he came to teach at our evangelical church for a bit. And then I enjoyed learning from him for about a year. And then we had to move to South Carolina. And so I'm happy to be able to join in on this.
Yeah, it's great seeing you again.
Good seeing you.
Let's see, who else do we have here that hasn't been? Jeff, were you here before? Jeff Gonda? Well, then we'll go to Larry. Chaplain Larry.
Before. There you go.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear me, but yeah, we were here before, but Jeff and Marcia here in Sheridan, Wyoming. It's just nice to participate.
Very nice. Okay, so we are at, oh boy, Larry, Chaplain Larry.
Yes, I'm an interfaith chaplain with the Salt Lake City Police Department, and it's a privilege to be here.
All right. Let's see, the numbers are the places are jumping. Mindy.
I am Mindy, and I was able to meet Rabbi Joe and Yael last year in Provo, and I'm also excited to learn all that I can.
Thank you. And let's see, we've got John Heighthouse.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Heighthouse. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and met Rabbi Joe and Sarah recently, and so looking forward to the conversation this morning.
All right, fantastic. And I guess Susan Taylor, I think you're the last one. If I've missed anybody, feel free to call out and let us know who you are and how you are. So Susan Taylor. Okay, so we have people also in the audience here. So when we have questions and answers, I'll repeat. If you guys have any questions out here, I'll repeat the questions so we can all hear. And before we begin our study, in Judaism, we always begin with a blessing called the Torah blessing. We don't just open up the text and begin studying. We realize that there is something worthy and of value that we are studying. So we make a blessing, offer a prayer of gratitude over the text that we're about to study. So for those who know it, we'll say it together. You can say it on mute or you can join in. And for those who don't know it in English, the basic translation is, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign or ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engage in Torah, in sacred study, in our holy scriptures, what we call Torah." And then we all say, or you all say, Amen. And before we begin our study on the third of the pilgrimage festivals, what I thought I would do is play off of this blessing a little bit, because in the Talmud, in the oral tradition of Judaism, one of the questions, you're asked 6 questions when you go beyond and meet your maker, our maker. And one of the questions is, it says, Pilpalta b'chokhmah, did you engage deeply with wisdom? It's an interesting question, and maybe another time we'll discuss that more fully, but the idea of what we're doing here today in life, in the life of a Jew, as our Sabbath study is, we are engaging with wisdom. And very often when we study, we simply read through it. And we might memorize it, but the question really is, are we engaging deeply with wisdom? And I just want that in the background, because your studies will be transformed if you're seeking wisdom, realizing that there is deep wisdom within these texts. But you have to, Pilpalta is a really, really deep analysis of. It's not just casual learning or study. It's dedicated and deeply engaged study for the purpose of growing in wisdom. Pilpalta b'chokhmah. So that's one of the questions. Again, maybe in the future we'll have a whole study on all of the questions that were asked. But today what we're going to do is we're going to explore wisdom through the prism of the Jewish sacred calendar. And we're going to start with where we are in the Jewish calendar, which is the last of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So we have 3, Passover or Pesach, we have Shavuos, or what you call in English, at least in the Christian world, Pentecost, we just call it weeks. And the third holiday is Sukkot or Sukkot, which often is translated as tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, or of huts or of booths. And it's a holiday where we dwell in these special structures, these holy structures. You can look it up online, what a sukkah looks like. Sukkah is often how they spell it. But Each of the pilgrimage festivals has a different energy, but one thing they all share is it's a journey. We begin with the first pilgrimage festival, which is called Pesach or Passover, and that's about redemption. We get redemption from bondage. But then where do we go from there? Okay, I'm not under bondage any longer, at least from without. Where do I go from there? So the next pilgrimage that we journey into is called Shavuos. And that just in the Jewish calendrical approach, it's not explicit in the Bible or in the Torah, but the way Jews understand what Christians call Pentecost is that's when Moses was up on Sinai and received much more than the 10 Commandments, but we'll just leave it at the 10 Commandments to simplify. So we got out of Egypt, and now we're getting guidance. We're getting holy insight and instruction, so we know how to make it through life. Those are the first two holidays. That's the energy, I guess you could say, of the first two holidays. And the third pilgrimage festival, where we again journey, we used to journey to Jerusalem, but it was a journey. The third one is this festival called Sukkot, or Feast of Tabernacles. And we dwell in these booths or huts for the entire week. And the idea, what it celebrates is God's protective covering. Or there's two opinions, whether it was the clouds of glory that sheltered us through our wanderings in the desert, or they were actual booths that we lived in. So again, we won't go into the Talmudic debate of what the form was, but the idea of some protective covering. We got out from our bondage, from our enslavement, from our servitude. And now we have wisdom to guide us. But we also need a guide that is overseeing, watching, and offering us shelter and protection. So those are the three holidays that we're concluding this week. And there are many biblical references, and they all speak about, let's see, where is my, we'll do a few references. We're not going to put them up on the screen this time, but we will do a few readings just to give us a sense of what we're talking about in the Bible. I'm going to do them exclusively from Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but there are several other references to this festival of Sukkot. I just want to give us a sense of what the time period that we're celebrating is contextually, and then we'll develop it a little more through the prism and the wisdom of the rabbis, and also through your questions and through your answers and your discussions and reflections. So we will begin with Leviticus. Well, actually, it begins in Exodus 12, which is discussing the Exodus. It discusses the three pilgrimage festivals, but I'm going to read specifically from the description about Sukkot, of tabernacles. So it says in Leviticus 23, we'll go from a few verses between 33 and 44. 23 verses 33 through 44. So it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, and keep in your mind a lot of the details because we're going to highlight a few of them. It says, speak to the children of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of the 7th month is a feast of sukkah booths, of these huts, for 7 days unto the Lord. On the first day, there shall be a holy calling, and they often translate as a holy convocation, but the idea is there is a calling. And the question always is, are we listening? But there's a holy convocation or a holy calling, and I'm going to summarize this part. We're not to do any work. And then on the 8th day, there's another holy calling. It's called Shmini Atzeret, but we're not going to focus on that today. There's actually a 9th day that many Jews also celebrate. But again, we're focusing on just Sukkot today, the first 7 days. So at verse 39, it says again, on the 15th month, the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the land's grain, so there's a harvest dimension now, you shall celebrate the festival of the Lord for 7 days. And in verse 40, it says, you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a beautiful tree, which we understand it as it's an esrog. It's a lemon-like, citrus-like fruit. So we're going to take these four items on this special time. It's a harvest festival, but it's also a dwelling in this booth, reminding us of the protective covering. But it says, you'll take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a beautiful tree. That's the first. And the branches of a date palm. That's the second. And then twigs of a tree that have this particular formation, which we understand it as the myrtle. And then the fourth one is it's the brooks of the willow. And you will and then the tree, and then the fruit from the leaves from the willow tree. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. And it repeats over and over again about celebrating and celebrating. And then in verse 42, you shall dwell in sukkah booths for 7 days. So it says the same thing basically with a few different details in Deuteronomy 16, that we're to make for ourselves these booths, and we're to gather in the produce, and we're to rejoice for 7 days. We're to celebrate, and we are to be you're to be only filled with joy, only rejoice. And then at the end, it says this 3 times in the Torah, you're not to appear, they often translate it as empty-handed before the Lord. When we come for these pilgrimage festivals, it says you're not to appear empty-handed. But the word rekam literally means empty. It doesn't mean empty-handed. Context determines whether it's handed or not. But you're not to appear empty. And hopefully we'll get to that, assuming we have time. But the key factors that I want to highlight for this time that we are celebrating with these few verses, and it's in Chronicles, it's in Kings, it's in Zechariah, it's in Ezra, it's in Nehemiah. All of these details that we're going to discuss are scattered throughout the Bible. And there are even New Testament references to this holiday. So the themes that I want to highlight, I'm going to give a quick summary, and then we'll highlight a few themes just so we can see how this holiday developed in the minds of the rabbis, in the poetic hearts and minds of the rabbis. So we understand, one, this festival is called Sukkot, or booths or tabernacles, and it's a holy calling. It is a time that we are being called into a different way of holy living, of celebratory time. And it is a harvest festival. And we take these 4 species. Again, we take that esrog, that citron-like fruit, that citrus fruit. We take a palm frond or a palm branch. We take a myrtle leaves and also willows, leaves of a willow tree, branches. And the key element here also is that we dwell within this structure for 7 days. And I think what is important for us just to highlight, I'm going to highlight 3 themes. I'm going to highlight the idea. 1, we're going to discuss the 4 species, because these are central to the holiday. These 4 species are critical. And then we'll discuss the idea of dwelling and then joy. These are 3 grand themes that the rabbis have developed out of these simple texts that we just read. And the first idea here is of these 4 species. When we take them, we have various rituals on how we use them on the holy time. But 3 of them are bound up: the palm frond, the myrtle leaves, and the willow branches, or the willow branches and the myrtle branches. They're bound up, they're wrapped together, and we hold them, and then we hold the esrog, that lemon citrus-like fruit. And we say a blessing and we put it together, and then there's this type of ritual shaking that we'll discuss in a moment. But what's interesting about, first of all, these 4 fruits is they're not really mentioned in the Bible. The rabbis had their own hermeneutical way of discovering what they were. And there are debates, but the esrog is the first one we'll discuss. And it looks like a lovely lemon. And what the esrog represents in the rabbinic mind is it has two aspects to it. It has a taste and it has a smell. So taste and smell. And what the rabbis say about that is the taste represents the study of what we call Torah, the sacred text, whatever your sacred text is. So this fruit that we have, this tree that is a beautiful fruit, it represents study, meaning mind, and it also has a smell or a fragrance. And the fragrance for the rabbis represents how you conduct your life, your deeds. How do you live a life filled with commandment? Is it a commandment lived and fulfilled life based on our holy Torah, on our sacred text? So we've got intellect and we've got action. But it also represents, according to the rabbis, the heart. And so what they do with these symbolic fruits and plant structures that we're shaking and having in our rituals is they make a life practice out of them. And they ask us, in our sacred life, is my study, is my intellect involved with my study, or am I simply just going through it? And am I more fragrant after, in the sense that how am I living as a result of my study of the sacred? So it's both. That's the ideal. And what we'll see with the others is they all have some aspect of that, except for the willow. So the lulav, the palm frond, it's a date palm, that has taste. So there are people in life who simply study texts. Their interest is in the academic, intellectual study of the sacred, but not necessarily really in living its ideals or its commands. There are people like that. I know many, and they're wonderful people, but that's a different type of approach than the ideal, which is represented by that etrog, the lemon-like citrus fruit, which has intellect and mind, and it also has a life lived based on our studies. And remember, it symbolizes the heart. It symbolizes the heart. So are we coming with heart and mind as we live our holy wisdom? That's the ideal. But some people just have that interest in the intellect, in the lulav, in the date palm. There's another one is the myrtle branch, the hadassim. The myrtle doesn't have taste. It just has a fragrance or a smell. And again, the smell represents action. Are you living the commands of the holy wisdom? You're not so much a student of the text. You don't have a great mind, and that's perfectly fine. Your interest is in reading the basics and then living. How can I live this text, these holy words? How can I make them a part of my life? And we have many people like that. And then the fourth one is the willow, the aravais, the willow branch. And and by the way, the date palm represents the spine of a person. So the esrog, the lemon-like fruit, represents the heart. The date palm represents the spine. The myrtle, it looks like eyes. It represents the eyes. And then the willow, the branches of willow, that has no fragrance and no taste, because there are some people in life who simply have no reference for the holy or for holy living. They might be lovely people, but it's not based on any sacred text. So those are the four sort of paradigms that Judaism categorizes people through. One way, I should say, that Judaism categorizes people in terms of holy living. And the willows represent the lips. So what's beautiful about this is it represents these fruits and these branches or these this plant life represents the heart, the eyes, the mouth, and the spine. And what this teaches us is that ideally we need all of them because we put them all together. We don't just want one. We take all of them and we put them together. And then we ask ourselves, where is my heart? Is it present? And the spine in many cultures and many traditions, that's what we have: backbone, we have courage. Do I have the courage to live this wisdom? Because often living a life of holy calling is challenging. There's, throughout religious history or throughout history, people of faith have been persecuted, and tragically, they've also persecuted in the name of faith, which is a real distortion of what faith should lead us to live like. But the idea of, is my heart present? That's the esrog. Do I have the courage? Do I have the backbone? Do I have the spine? That's that palm frond to live this light. It's not easy. The myrtle, the hadassim, that represents the eyes. And what that teaches, again, metaphorically, this is all metaphor and symbol. The question is, how am I looking and viewing life? How am I looking at others when I see them? Am I looking at them in a way that is honoring and respectful? Or am I looking at them with judgment and criticism? We want to have eyes that have vision, not just eyes that see the faults. It's easy to condemn, but it's much more difficult to see the beauty in another person. And that's why we start with heart. We have to start with that place of heart. That's what the esrog represents. And sometimes that takes a lot of courage to believe that there is something greater in that person that I am seeing right now before me, who is not living the beautiful life that I know they could. They're not living the ideals that I know they have the potential to live. So I have to have faith and courage that my eyes can see beyond simply how they're living at this moment and see within them the deeper and greater potential that is there. And then the final one is the willows, the aravais. And that again is the person who, as far as sacred living, they don't study sacred texts and they don't live by any codes or creeds or any commandments that are found within holy texts. They may live a beautiful life, but it's just not based on a text. And that represents the lips. And the question then for us becomes, how am I speaking? How am I communicating with people in life? Same thing with the eyes. Am I looking with criticism, with condemnation? Am I speaking in ways that demean, in ways that condemn, in ways that divide? If you're deeply rooted in your heart, which is the esrog, and if you take what the palm frond symbolizes, which is spine and courage, if you have the courage to live with your heart, and if you have the courage to live with what the myrtle represents, the eyes, to see the beauty, to see the good, to see the holy in another, and if you have the courage to actually speak your beliefs before another person and speak in a way that is honoring, this world will change. And all of these rituals in Judaism are always meant to enhance the world. And the proof of this is when we take them, and we have 3 of them in one group, and then we have the citron, the esrog, it's called the citron in English. It's like a lemon. We put them all together. And depends on if you're right-handed or left-handed, which ones you put. But we take them and then we shake them. And again, there are different ways, different customs of how we shake. Some go from the east, they go clockwise, then they go up and down. Others go south, north, east, up, down, west. Regardless of the direction, the idea is we would have them all together. And we start with the heart. Put them near our heart. Because we always want to begin with the heart. And the heart also means mind in Hebrew. Lev is heart and mind. Biblical Hebrew, it's the same word. So we take all of these fruits or this plant life, and we put them near our hearts together. And then we shake. We bring them out into the world and we shake and we bring it back. We do that with all of the directions. Just to make it simple, the simplest way is east, south, west, north, up, down, the 6 directions. And the idea is, I am coming from the heart and I am extending my heart into the world. I am living with heart. I am shaking. I am trying to bring out and shake up my awareness that I need to come from a deeper place of heart into the world. I need to bring my heart into the world that I am living in. And then we bring it back to the heart. Because the idea there, again, I think, symbolically, is that that's wonderful that I am living with heart and bringing heart and love into the world. But I'm also now bringing the world into my heart, meaning I am bringing the other, and the other in all directions. I am bringing the other into my heart. It's not just me giving heart and coming with love, but it's also me bringing you, the other, into my heart, because it's both. We reach out with heart and we bring back home with heart. And there are other symbolic ways that the rabbis understand this, but this is how I've been working with it through this time period. Because so often in life, we're missing this central part of our lives. We're not engaging with the world through heart. And then all of the other body parts. Do we have the courage to live? Do I have the vision to see the beauty? Do I have the respectful speech that I need to have when I'm conducting my life? That's the simple, a simple summary of the 4 fruits that we mentioned in Leviticus 23 and what they possibly represent in our lives. And before we move on to the next theme or the next aspect, which is the dwelling, because we have to dwell in the sukkah, I'm going to highlight again these arba minim, the 4 species, these 4 plant life, these 4 plants that we have this ritual with, and we'll get to the dwelling and the joy in a moment. But before we move on, I've set it up. I've offered us a way. I'd love to hear for a few moments if anybody has any thoughts on the Zoom, and then in the audience, if there are also, we'll have a few questions and answers about where this potentially leads you, or why it doesn't lead you in that direction, but leads you in a different direction, what these fruits potentially symbolize. So anybody on the Zoom, there's more, if you can just call out, you don't have to raise your hand. If anybody has any thoughts, just call out and we'll start with that. And if not on the Zoom, we'll go into the audience. So does anybody have any thoughts or reflections on the 4 species?
There's something
And
in my mind, my friend. Have you noticed all the ritual objects of Sukkot are, I don't want to call them disposable, but they're very temporary. They don't last long. And one Jewish tradition is some Jewish communities still read the book of Ecclesiastes, which talks about how temporal and short life is and finding what good there is while you have time. The rest of the thought just flew out of my head. ADHD, sorry.
well, we will revisit that, Christo, when we get to joy, because you're right. The custom is on this time period that we are in is called Zman Simchasenu. It is Mvi'ais Ach Sameach. It's a period of our joy. It's the time of our joy. And we are to only be happy, only rejoice, regardless, and we'll get to this in a moment, regardless of our circumstances, not because life is bliss and blessed. We are still, even in the midst of life, we are to find joy. We are to find joy. And that, coupled with reading the book of Ecclesiastes, if you've ever read it, and we'll read a few verses from it, you will see that there is, to put it mildly, tension between those two approaches. Finding joy in Ecclesiastes. It can be. And I assure you, the rabbis had a very good reason for pairing up these two different models. But thank you, Christo. Anybody else? And if not in our Zoom, then I'll go to the audience. Anybody else in the Zoom?
Yeah, Joe, this is Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I really liked what you said about the palm front being like our spine and the courage it takes to share your beliefs. But also you mentioned that that can bring a healing to the world, and that can be challenging to figure out the right way to say that to. But I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, if anybody has anything more to say about that, I'd hear it, but I thought I just mentioned that.
Yeah. No, thank you. And the reason the order is the esrog, the heart first, and then courage, is courage that is not tempered by a loving heart. We know what that can produce. And it's not always beautiful. It has to always be grounded in heart, mind, but heart. So thank you, Jim. Okay. Anybody in the audience have any questions? Yes, AC, my brother.
Rabbi, asked the connection between the 4 species and the 4 questions of Passover.
Very nice. So AC asked a question. In Judaism, the number 4 is, we mentioned this last night in our studies, that like all traditions, there are certain numbers that are sacred and have deep symbolic meaning. And the idea of 4 species, the arba minim, the 4 species, we have a lot of 4s in the Jewish tradition. One of them on Passover, the first of the pilgrimage festivals, we have a part of the ritual evening. It involves 4 questions that are asked. So they do make, because it's all part of a pilgrimage journey, all 3 of them. But there are 4s. There are numerous 4s in our tradition, a number of 4s, and 4 represents, one thing it represents is completeness in terms of a journey, right? You got north, south, east, west, but it does represent, it is connected to the 4 questions. They interrelate and integrate all of them. And when we get to Pesach, which we're coming up to again next, we'll make that links because we'll have both backgrounds then. Anybody else have one more question, and then we'll move on from the 4 species to the dwelling. Okay, so the next one of the other themes that we highlighted in Leviticus 23 was we're to dwell in the sukkah. It says 7 days you're to dwell in the sukkah. And it says, Basukah is Teishvu Shivas Yamim. You should dwell in the sukkah. And when they say dwell in the rabbinic mind, you basically live in it. There are some who don't sleep, but according to Jewish law, you're supposed to even sleep in it. And we go from the house, which is our permanent structure, which is stable, into this very, by its construction, has to be, it's temporary and it's fragile. And it has there's different designs, but on the top of it, it has an even more fragile structure. It has just certain plant life that you put on top of it, enough to create shade. There has to be enough shade in there, but also you have to be able to see the stars. You have to be able to see the stars. And we'll discuss that in a moment. But the idea of dwelling, before I go, I'm going to ask a question on this. Why do you think we are, it's again, 7 days we are to dwell. What do you think the significance of that is? And there's not just one right answer. If anybody has a thought, just again, speak. You don't have to raise your hand.
Perhaps,
Anybody out here?
oh, sorry.
Sorry, go
Perhaps,
ahead.
well, I know that in Judaism, 7 is also a significant number and it symbolizes completeness. And
Yeah.
perhaps it's trying to symbolize that complete sense of dwelling.
In a very fragile
Mm-hmm.
structure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that thank you. Yeah. The idea is we are dwelling in something impermanent, but the idea of 7 represents wholeness. So we can find, even in impermanence, even in that which is fragile, we can find a dimension of wholeness, which is what 7 represents. And that's a metaphor for life. To be honest, life, we all know it. I don't know if anybody here has been living from eternity past. And if you have, then I take everything back that I'm about to say. But life generally is temporary, even at the longest, and it's fragile. And it leaves us often with so many questions and so many doubts and so much angst. And what this is telling us immediately after our high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which we just studied. We move out into a very new dwelling, something unfamiliar, something impermanent. And yet we find something whole, something complete, even within that temporary, impermanent structure. And that's what we have to do ultimately in life. This is giving us a model to live life by. I am living temporarily here on this plane, but I can find something whole and healing and beautiful. So that's the idea, I think, one idea of 7. And the idea of dwelling in there. Anybody else in the audience have a thought before I continue the idea of dwelling? Okay, so the idea of dwelling, leishev b'sukkah, we say, to dwell in this structure, this hut. Dwelling, the rabbis understand this, the mystics certainly. They understand not you're just in the structure. They understand and they make it very intimate that this structure is actually an embrace. It's a divine embrace. You are dwelling on this time with a grand embrace, and it's a journey that we are making. We are making the journey into this new place, this new structure, our new home, so to speak. And we are journeying into a place of embrace. That is an image. Again, they don't say it that way, but they do say it, they speak of it as being hugged. Even when we are out in a structure that is as fragile as a sukkah, which again is a metaphor, a mashal we say in Hebrew, a metaphor of life. Life is fragile. And it often seems harsh. We are under and at the mercy of nature, which is often harsh. And yet here the rabbis have symbolized this as hugging, because it's got 3 walls. We're being embraced, even in our impermanent structure, even in life, when life feels like it's fleeting and when it's, I don't know if I'm going to withstand this. We can still feel this idea of an embrace. And again, this is a pilgrimage festival, so I always root it back into that. And the question then is, how do we make that personal or intimate for us? I've walked into a place of embrace, and the question is, can I leave that? And leave that embrace, but live with the vision and the inspiration of embracing more in life, more fully in life. Not because life is beautiful, not because life is perfect, but even in that state that we are in, vulnerable, fragile. I don't harden. I go into a place of embrace in the sukkah. That's where I dwell. I want to enforce or reinforce this idea within me, to have it indwelling within me. I can dwell there. The question is it indwelling within me? This idea of being embraced so that when I leave, I can live with a heart that seeks to embrace. That's how I start with that. And this word for embrace, leshev is the infinitive, we say yashav is the verb, the root. It's related to a word for to deeply and attentively listen. Because the only way you can deeply dwell in anything, relationally or in a place of holiness, any type of deep dwelling, it requires attentive listening. You've got to be present. So my prayer for us as we go through these ritual practices and of the pilgrimage festival of Sukkot is that we take what they represent into our lives. So we began with, again, shaking, with all of those parts together, bringing it out into the world, from our hearts into the world back within. Now am I living and dwelling in this structure? Wonderful. But am I leaving with the embrace that I entered into? And am I embracing more fully life? The third aspect that it's repeated in here several times in the entire Bible. It's about rejoicing, joy, deep joy. That's the third model I want to leave us with. Again, in the context of a pilgrimage festival, this is the final of the three. This is the final journey of our pilgrimage festivals. First one, again, historically, was the Exodus out of Egypt. And then, according to the rabbis, it's the receiving of holy wisdom to guide us now that we're out of bondage so that we can live lives of light and wisdom. And the third one is now about dwelling in the sukkah. The question is, how am I dwelling? I am out, I have holy wisdom, and how am I dwelling and living with that wisdom? How am I dwelling with that wisdom? And the question we have to ask is, am I doing so with joy? Because it says, V'ha'isa ach sameach, you will be only joyous. The journey of these pilgrimage festivals is a journey into joy. It's dwelling in joy. We just finished dwelling and embracing, and we dwell now in joy. That is our end. That is our end. And the question, again, it's a beautiful question, but it's a painful question. As I go through my sacred life, through these holidays, in the end, when I finish my cycle, do I have more joy within? Is joy more deeply dwelling within me? And am I dwelling in joy? Again, not because life is perfect. I'm living in a fragile structure, and it's even cold. If it's too cold, you don't stay. But it's sometimes a little uncomfortable. Can I still find deep, enduring joy, even in the midst of my fragile existence? That's the journey of the sacred. That's the journey's end. It's in joy. Not, again, because life is perfect or complete. But what it's telling us is we can still have joy in the midst of, and you fill in the blank, that life often deals us. Life is often painful. If you've lived long enough, you've experienced it. But just because we are in pain doesn't negate the potential for joy. That's the journey that we are making in this sacred pilgrimage, or in these sacred pilgrimage festivals. They lead us ultimately out of bondage, into wisdom, ultimately grounded in deep joy, in spite of life's impermanence, life's fragile nature, life's suffering, life's trials. We still have the potential for deep joy and deep sorrow, right? Bertolt Brecht, in one of his poems, he wrote, is there singing? I think this is how it goes. It's very close to this, but is there singing during dark times? Well, singing is joy. Dark times is suffering. What I'm saying this represents in the text here, and this model of the pilgrimage festivals, is we have joy even in the midst of sorrow. So he asks a beautiful question. Is there singing during dark times? And he says, yes, we sing about the dark times. And we might even sing with tears. And it might be, he's not saying this, but this is what he means. The melody might be a minor. Might be a minor melody. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, but it's song. I still have that place and that moment of joy, of enjoying life. I'm embracing, to go back to the dwelling in the sukkah, I am embracing joy and I embrace the sorrow with it. But I can have both at the same time. And now to go back to Christo's.
Dad, just
yes,
before you continue, I'm sorry, Adit has his hand raised and I don't want
I
to.
am sorry. I'm sorry. All the hands raised, just speak. I tend to get lost in my thoughts. So Adit and Jim and anybody else. Yes.
I just wanted to quickly share, just hopping back a beat, Rabbi Joe, to what you were saying about the literal dwelling in the sukkah, right? This impermanent structure, one is open to the elements around the sides. The roof gives shade, though one can see the stars. I think one of the things that makes what you're saying so meaningful, and how I interpret it, is I think often about the sort of juxtaposition of moving from one's house with all of its sort of like attendant material comforts, dwelling for 7 days in this environment where one is forced to confront not just God in its most raw form, but one's own impermanence, one's own vulnerability, and be reminded that it is possible to dwell, which is to say, in entirety, accept and be exposed to those circumstances, and not just survive, but find joy. And just to put the sort of ribbon on this sort of like feeling that I had in this thought that I wanted to share, I often feel that life is a lot more difficult when one insists that the circle of one's comfort be drawn very far outside of oneself. To put it another way, I need the car, I need the house in the neighborhood, I need the job. It can feel so powerful to be reminded, as this sort of metaphor does, that actually that circle can be drawn much closer to ourselves. And the beauty and the joy and the purpose and the meaning and God still dwells there. We can dwell there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Adit. Thank you. That's why I love our conversations. Thank you. And Jim. Gilchrist.
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand if I had it raised.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm waving to you. Any other thoughts before we round out our study with the book of Ecclesiastes and joy? Because
yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yes. No. Yes.
I found it very interesting, and I like the idea that the sukkah kind of represents going into a place of vulnerability where we're exposed to the elements, we're exposed to the world and life, but yet it can still offer a connection or a greater connection to the divine or to God, if you will. But what I like about it is like you said about the embrace of the hug, is that through that connection, it then reminds us to then be able to take it back out into the world to then share that with others. Those people who may not have that connection.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Jimmy. Yes.
To a certain extent, you've answered my question, but how do we square, so to speak, the notion of a portable or pop-up sukkah with the commandment to dwell in the sukkah? Is it just a symbolic?
Okay, so the portable sukkah is this is a more technical question. And what was your name? I'm sorry? Kim. So Kim asked about, there's something in Judaism that has become popular, and it's called a portable sukkah. And you don't dwell in that. That has one specific function, so you can go and shake the lulav because they like it being shook in a temporary structure, because all of the symbolism that we discussed before about the four species, the arba minim, with the representing the heart and the eyes and the mouth and the spine, and we put them all together. We want to make sure that we're connecting everything with the pilgrimage of dwelling. And even in the impermanence, I can still come from that place of heart and reach out. And even in that state of very fragile, often painful existence. And again, it has to be more shade in there by law. It has to be darker within, more shade than light. Because even in that dark place of light, we still have to always make sure we're not hardening our hearts and closing our hearts off from life and the other. We still reach out with our hearts of love, and we still bring in from the world, even though our hearts may be broken, even though life may be dark and filled with trials. So that's a functional, that doesn't fulfill the dwelling. So but thank you. Anybody else? Okay. And so real briefly on Ecclesiastes, we read from the book of Ecclesiastes on the Sabbath in between, called the Shabbos Chol Hamoed Sukkos. We have the 7 days. There's always a Sabbath in between. And on this Sabbath, which is a time where we have extra time to reflect and dwell, the rabbis, to highlight the idea of Veha Yisa Ach Sameach, about being only and deeply joyous, regardless of what life is dealing us. The rabbis, in their infinite wisdom, although sometimes we might want to question it with some of these ideas, but they said, let's read Ecclesiastes to solidify the deep joy that this holiday is supposed to bring us. And what does verse 2 start off with? Havel Havalim, Amar Kaheles. Havel Havalim, Hakoil Havel. Wow. So I know there's many different translations, because that word Havel, the root of the word has to do with like a breath, like a mist, a vapor. And it symbolizes meaninglessness and futility and emptiness. And famous translation from the King James, vanity of vanities. It has nothing to do with being vain. That's the issue. That's the only problem I have with that word. But vain in the sense of it's empty, not proud. The question is, why are we reading this? I could give you another 20 verses that speak of this, that there's nothing new under the sun, nothing new under the sun, that all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. So much comes into our life and we never seem fulfilled. Well, gee, now I just want to celebrate. Thank you. Okay, the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. Everything is just simply repeating. What real value is there for a man, for a human being, in all the gains that he makes beneath the sun? All such things are wearisome. They're just weary and wearying. Oh, I want to just dance right now, right in front of you. I'm getting happier and happier. There is nothing new beneath the sun. I mean, this phrase is repeated almost 30 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's much worse. It gets much worse. Even wisdom doesn't help. And then we go to chapter 3. That was all in verse 1. Real quickly, verse 3, chapter 3, talking about, let's go, verse 19. for regarding or concerning the fate of a human being and the fate of a beast, they have one and the same fate. As one dies, so the other. Both have the same life essence, life breath. A human being has no advantage or superiority over a beast, since both are essentially nothing. They amount to nothing. Okay, forgive me for not dancing. Both go to the same place. We came from the dust, I'm summarizing, and we return to the dust. And who knows if a person's breath, life breath, rises up again. Wow. I might need another drink to figure out why they chose this, because I need a drink after that. What were they thinking that this somehow brings us joy? This was what they chose to read on the Sabbath of, in between those 7 days, when we have the most time to reflect and dwell with in the Sukkah. We read it in the synagogue, but then we dwell. So I think the simple one answer is that they give is they're concerned about just simple revelry and joy, that joy unrestrained and untamed and untempered by something else can lead us into a life of debauchery and unholiness. So they're worried about just this nature or notion of unrestrained joy, right? That's in Deuteronomy 16. Just talking about rejoicing and celebrating. But that might lead us into a way that isn't considered ideal, to put it mildly. That's what the rabbis teach, one teaching that they offer. My thought this year was different. This is not in replacing, it's just in addition. I think actually it hit me about 4:30 in the morning last night, because I was thinking about this. Amidst the deep thunder and pounding of the rain, I realized that the rabbis having us read Koheles, Ecclesiastes, on this period of joy, they're actually honoring almost our humanity. They're gracing us with this very special gift. I mean, yes, they are strange bedfellows. There's nothing new under the sun, and all life is just a burden. And now let's celebrate. What I think they're trying to do with setting up these two models, these two worlds, is not either or. What they're trying to do is help us remember the commandment in the Bible is to be joyous and find deep joy, to dwell in a place of deep joy, and then live with that joy and service grounded in heart, hopefully enlightening your vision so you see the beauty of another, hopefully enhancing and healing our speech, our lips, so we speak better. But the idea of deep joy and deep loss of hope. The rabbis teach one opinion that Ecclesiastes was written near the end of Solomon's life, when things weren't going well. And this was his last testament, and so to speak, I've lost some faith, I've lost some hope. But we include it in our sacred wisdom because that's part of life. So I think, to sum up, the idea here of deep joy and deep reflection on the questions that lead us into a dark place is absolutely, yes, life is suffering. That's throughout the text. Yes, life is suffering, and joy also is. That's what they are telling us. I think, yes, it's also to rein in our potential joy that could lead us astray. But I think more deeply, it's telling us, making us face it, fully. You are to dwell in joy even in and when your life is mirrored by the words that Koheles, that Ecclesiastes represent. It's both. We can have both. V'ha'isa ach sameach. Yes, we can find deep, abounding, enduring joy. Even in the midst of life is suffering. Life is just simply a burden that is nothing but a trial, and there is nothing new or renewing. We can still absolutely find joy even within those periods of life. That's what Bertolt Brecht, I think, spoke of in his poem when he said, is there singing during dark times, the dark times of Ecclesiastes? Yes, we sing about the dark times. And I pray that we all allow that wisdom to dwell within us, whether you dwell in a sukkah or not. I do pray that we dwell in darkness, in sorrow, in pain, in exile, whether soulfully or relationally or psychically, but that we remember the four species that we had, that we always remember the heart is there. And the vision doesn't have to be corrupted just by our circumstances. And neither does our courage, the spine, the palm frond, and neither does our speech. We may be in deep, deep agony, in angst, even angry, but we can still see the beauty in another. We can still speak with a tongue that honors the life of the person before you. We can have that courage and always remember we reach out and we reach in when we shake them. It always comes back to heart. I pray we live with a deeper, deeper awareness of heart, live more beautifully with heart, and love, and reach out with love, and bring in with love. Because it starts with us. It starts with us. So Ecclesiastes is your friend. Darkness, hello darkness, my old friend. Amen. There we go. We'll all sing that in the sukkah if it stops raining. So if there's anybody who wants to offer a closing thought, I've been rambling a long time. I'd love to hear your closing thoughts or wisdom or insights. If not, we will say Shabbat Shalom. But is there anybody before we go who wants to share a thought either in the audience or in the Zoom land?
Two things.
Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Yael.
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead,
Um,
Christo. Oh, go, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Christo.
Just like the ritual objects of the lulav, the etrog, the sukkah, they're temporary, they don't last long enough. Neither did my time visiting Temple Aaron in their wonderful synagogue, and neither do my lessons with y'all on Zoom. Don't last long enough.
Bless you. Thank you. Thank you. And let's remember the only reason that we are here is because of two wonderful souls and their rest of their, I don't know the rest of the people that support you. In addition to these, yes. Okay. Okay. I don't know the rest of the board, folk. All right. So all of the people here and all of the people I don't know, we're here because of saints who devote their lives to keeping this beautiful structure with us. So all of these teachings are in honor of and with gratitude that we have a place, like you said, Christo. We have a place, and I pray we continue to have this place. Yes, Yael.
Two things. Number one, I just wanted to say that I loved the way that you ended by saying that you hope we have a tongue that honors the life of the person. I love that. I just wanted to point that out. And there was also a comment, and I wanted you to hear it because it's
Okay, thank you.
it's from Chaplain Larry Love.
Hmm.
And he said, "Thank you. Very insightful and lovely. I've been studying joy, and this adds wisdom." And I just wanted you to hear that.
Maybe one time we'll do a study on joy and wisdom because there's a deep connection. There's a deep connection between joy, wisdom, and kindness, actually. It's a beautiful, another grouping we can live by. So anybody out here want to leave us with a final blessing? Yes. Brother Neil, our wonderful president and husband of Sherry.
Rabbi, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Come here. Thank you for all your energy and your spirit and your inspiration. I just want to thank everybody before we shut this down and turn off the recording that we certainly appreciate everybody that's here personally and live, and those of you out there in Zoom, and those of you that might be listening to this later, like I will. Thank you for being here. We're trying to do everything we can to keep the brick and mortar together and the roof above us so we can continue this special form of energy that began here in this small town, Trinidad, Colorado, just over 140 years ago. The sukkah that sits outside marks maybe a new trend for possibly over 70, 75 years. Possibly Trinidad has never had a sukkah here, but we have a sukkah in place right now due to some of the local AC and Rabbi and Kyle and John and folks here that have helped out, Kim, Sherry, everybody. So thank you for being here. And I just want to ask everyone to please visit our website occasionally, templeaaron.org, to see any updates for holidays, for services, for tour studies, more work that Rabbi Joe is going to be doing for us. And thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.